Your time. Welcome to the cave. We are very grateful that you're willing to share your knowledge with us on sexual abuse, specifically the sexual abuse of boys. And I am very confident that every child protection social worker who's going to watch this is really going to learn a lot. So thank you very much. Phil, I don't know if you would mind starting off by just telling the social workers more about yourself, your professional background, your experience.
Yep. So I've been working as a counsellor, psychotherapist for just under 16 years, predominantly working with boys and men who've experienced different types of sexual abuse, either as adults, children, or as both. And again, the therapy I provide is tailored to their needs. Some boys and men prefer a very solution-focused approach. Some prefer something different. So it depends on what I feel competent to work with and what they want and the specifics and the context. I also deliver a lot of training. Again, here in the UK where I am, I sort of go all over sort of England and Scotland and deliver training on boys and child sexual exploitation, how to identify them, why we're not identifying them, how can we improve practice, methods that are generally seen as being successful when working with boys, and I supervise therapists and practitioners who are working with children who are being abused. So that's kind of me. That's a bit about me.
Oh, wonderful. No, great. Excellent. All right, Phil, so we don't have all the time in the world, although I wish we did. So today we're discussing two topics. And the first one I'd like to ask you is, what are the typical signs or indicators or symptoms that you've now learned about in your experience that a boy might be sexually abused? So if a social worker here in South Africa is investigating a case, or she's just monitoring a family, or he's just monitoring a family, is there anything that they should be on the lookout for in terms of telltale signs that a boy might be sexually abused?
Well, it's a very interesting topic. So here in where I am in England, in 2009, the government released guidance on sexual exploitation. And in my humble opinion, it had some good bits, some not so good bits. But when it talked about boys, it was very explicit. And it said, boys will not disclose in the same way or at the same rate as girls. There are issues that disproportionately and uniquely affect boys, and we need to think about that. Fast forward now 10 years, the current guidance and the current guidance that we have, in my opinion, doesn't really do the same job when it highlights boys. It's almost like they become invisible, which is a shame. But when you read the 2009 guidance, it has a list of what some people call risk indicators, warning signs. And it says, if a child is displaying these or some of these behaviours, it could mean that they are being sexually abused and exploited. And it lists them, ... Then a few pages later, it says, here are some behaviours that boys will or may display to let you know they might be being sexually abused and exploited. And it lists them, ... They are more or less exactly the same as the ones of the child. Now, one of the things we could say is that there are warning signs and behaviours that boys may be more likely to display, such as anger and violence, perhaps, as an indicator that something might be wrong. But the really important point to make is that there are no warning signs or behaviours that only girls display and only boys display.
Okay.
The obvious exception is with girls, issues around pregnancies, miscarriages and terminations. But if, simply put, let's look at an example. So if you imagine that you have, let me think of an example. So you have a girl, she's coming home late, she's not telling her parents where she's been, she's come home with a gift or an item and she's saying she found it on the street, or she won't say, a bit vague, she won't say where she got it from, she's not going to school, and she's seen hanging around with an older man being driven around. A lot of professionals will think, hang on, that could be child sexual exploitation. All those warning signs are there. Could that man be grooming her and all of that? We don't know. Let's look into it. So there's warning signs that are there that tell us something could be going on that's concerning.
Yes.
It might be child sexual exploitation, it could be something else. But in my experience, and backed up by quite a lot of research, it says a lot of professionals will generally think that could be child sexual exploitation. Let's have meetings, get together and talk. But then you have a boy. The boy is the same age as the girl. He's also going missing. He's also not at school. He's also coming home late and not telling anyone where he is. And he's also coming home with an item or a gift that he's been vague about or lying about how he got. And he's also seen hanging around with perhaps an older adult. So it's exactly the same. The difference is that more professionals are more likely to look at that situation with the girl and think, we're worried about her. Could she be experiencing sexual abuse? Let's look into it. But they are less likely to think that when a boy displays those behaviours. And that is the gender-biased practice we have to challenge. Now, when you see boys with these situations, I generally find that professionals go, well, it's probably youth offending, it's crime, it's drugs, that man is using that boy to break the law and all of that. And I often say, that's absolutely possible. But what's happening is you have the girl here and the boy here. The girl is displaying these behaviours, the boy's displaying these behaviours. You're potentially victimising the girl, you're criminalising the boy. And that can have an impact on your practice. And it could be that the boy and the girl are both being criminally and sexually exploited.
Yes.
But often what I find is when a girl displays these behaviours, we are much quicker to think this could be sexual exploitation, let's look into it. Whereas a boy, we don't consider sexual exploitation. So in terms of what are the warning signs, I would often say that actually they can be exactly the same. What we need to do is check our reaction and check our gender bias. So I spoke at a conference in the Midlands in England a few years ago, and I was on stage and I did the intro and all of that. And I spoke about a boy, anonymised, of course.
Yeah.
And I said, so this boy is going missing. We don't know where he is when he goes missing. When he turns up, he won't tell us where he's been. He's been seen in town hanging around with some older men. He's coming home with a bit of money and gifts, and he's not saying how he got it.
Yeah.
What do we think? And a senior police officer at this conference said, Phil, if that was a girl, I'd be very worried. And I would absolutely get my team to investigate, look into it, gather more information, do a risk assessment, and so on. Okay, this is a boy, I said. And he said, I'm not even going to consider that CSE is a possibility because that's nearly every boy that I'm aware of. And I said, that's not a reason to not consider CSE. Wow. And I think the problem is that the warning signs and behaviours that many boys display to let you know something is wrong or that they might be being sexually exploited can often be exactly the same behaviours that let you know that they might be being groomed for crime, drugs, or that they're involved in youth offending. And that's part of the problem. And professionals in general, in my experience, are generally quicker to go youth offended than CSE.
Yeah.
So at this conference, I said to this senior police officer, so this boy has not disclosed sexual abuse exploitation and you haven't seen it. And the bottom line is that we will only know for a fact if any child is being sexually abused and exploited if they tell us, oh, we see it. You're rarely going to see it and you're rarely going to get a disclosure. When you think of boys, it's even less likely you get a disclosure and even less likely you're going to see it because your perception is affected by gender bias. So we need to be aware of the warning signs and not think, well, if a girl displays these behaviours, it's CSE. If a boy displays them, it's not. So I asked this senior police officer person, what other behaviours then? Because we've got all these behaviours on this PowerPoint slide. He's going missing, ... If a girl displays those behaviours, it's enough for you to think this might be child sexual exploitation. I need to look into it. A boy displays exactly the same behaviours and you're thinking it's not enough. So let me ask you, what more would you need for you to think this could be child sexual exploitation? Yeah. And he stopped and he looked backward. He said, I need a disclosure. I said, so let me just clarify. A girl displays these behaviours. You don't need her to disclose that she's being abused for you to consider it. a boy displays exactly the same behaviours, you need him to tell someone what's happening for you to consider it.
Sure.
If that was the other way around, there'd be outrage.
Yes.
I went, why is that? That's not okay.
No.
I went, that's gender bias.
Yes.
And he said, yes, but it could just be youth offending. And I went, you're absolutely right. It could be. But it could be youth offending and something else.
Yes.
And the warning signs that, as I've said, a child displays to let you know they're being sexually exploited often look identical to youth offending. The problem is, it's easier to prove youth offending than it is child sexual exploitation. And a lot of boys, because of issues around masculinity and what it means to be a victim, would rather be seen as young offenders than victims of child sexual abuse. The other problem as well is that you've got less chance of a boy recognising that he is being abused. And there's lots of reasons for that, because of issues around perceptions of masculinity, what the harmful things we tell boys, especially if the perpetrator is a female, all of that sort of stuff. There's huge differences with gender, where you have an older man grooming and abusing a girl compared to an older woman grooming and abusing a boy, and it happens. And certainly we're seeing an increase over here about how this is going on, but it's about challenging that gender bias. So in answer to your question, I would say that there are behaviours that boys are more likely to display than girls, like expressions of anger and violence, for example, but that doesn't mean girls never display it. It means that actually what we have to think is, let's just think about a child, a 14-year-old child, and let's say this 14-year-old child is doing ... So what I'll give you a very quick example to visual. I might share the screen if that's okay. I don't know if this will work. You can edit this out if this doesn't work.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and find my an image that will make this a little bit visual for you. To hopefully make the point. So you might have to edit this bit out, because I'm just trying to find my.
But the bottom line of what you're saying is that our bias plays a big role. It's
that exactly. And sometimes what we have is we've got unconscious bias, we don't know we're doing it, and sometimes we've got absolute conscious bias, and when it's conscious, that's what needs challenging. And when I deliver training, the great thing about delivering training is I meet all these wonderful professionals that say, Phil, we work with all these girls but hardly any boys. Why is that? We need to get more boys identified. Why are we not finding boys, and what is that about, and why are they not being referred? And these professionals are amazing, because they're very open to discussion, to learning, and they're open to exploring their own biases. It's the professionals that are not on the training that really need to be on the training, because they're the ones that have an impact. But if I show you this, I don't think I can share the screen because you're the host. So you might need to make. I mean, you can, if you click, you can make me the host just for a minute, but I don't know if it will record. I'm not sure.
The only worry I have is the time, because it only records for 30 minutes and then it...
Oh, okay. All right, we'll leave it then. But ultimately, what I was going to show you was a visual image of how, well, let's look at these warning signs. And if you do little activities where you say, okay, you have a child who's 14 and they are coming home late, no one knows where they are, all the warning signs are there, and you give it to professionals and say, what's the risk of child sexual exploitation, do you think, based on this information? I guarantee you, there'll be some professionals that will assume the child is a girl, but there'll be others that will go, well, is this a boy or a girl? And that's the point where you have to go, it doesn't matter. You need to make a decision based on the behaviours and the warning signs,
not the gender,
without being influenced by gender. That's the point.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you so much.